Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name is Andy Libson, and today we are joined by socialist and community organizer Kenny Zepeda and writer and teacher Jessica. And you'll notice someone's missing. That's Eduardo. As he mentioned, I think at the end of our last episode, he is on his way to Colombia. And he may hopefully be returning to What's Left next week. We might be able to get an interview. He hopes to get an interview of people who are doing stuff in Colombia in resistance to the mass vaccination, and some of the lockdown things that are going on there. But we'll see. So today we're actually going to be revisiting Ukraine, Russia, United States, and the idea of global war, World War III. And Jessica and I think you and I talked was it yesterday or Tuesday?
It might have been both.
Maybe by both, yeah. We weren't really sure what to discuss. We were thinking about maybe the outreach we've been doing around the vaccines and mandates, stuff like that. And then this article I saw, and it was an article that came out in Lou Rockwell, Scott Ritter's Switcheroo, Why I Radically Changed My Overall Assessment. Basically, he's a person who has been critical of the U.S. invasion or the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine, and identifying it not as something that is to defend Ukraine, but is basically an aggressive action to draw Russia into a war and then drain, as he says, fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, with the aim of larger geopolitical interests of smashing Russia. And I suspect he would say the same thing that I would say, which is for the U.S. to be able to rule the globe. And once Russia goes down, China would be next. And his assessment of the war had been one that was different from the mainstream. He had often said that no, Russia is not losing. Russia's not trying to take Kiev. Russia's actually just pinning some forces down in Kiev with the idea of doing two things: demilitarizing Ukraine and denazifying, taking out the Azov battalions and taking out the ability of Ukraine to operate as a front for the U.S. and NATO powers who had been supplying it in 2014. And his claim was that actually, even though they're taking some time, is that was slowly happening. And I think the big issue was he felt that that Ukraine would not be able to resupply, would not be able to remilitarize. And I think one of the things I read here is in this article, and the person who wrote the article is almost mad at Scott Ritter for saying he's rethinking it. I'm actually glad he's rethinking it, because it's caused me to think more deeply about what I think is going on there. Even though the implications of his rethinking, I think, are very scary. But what he's basically saying is that $40 billion that has recently been voted by the United States, that was not for nothing. That's not some Hail Mary $40 billion to hopefully let Ukraine hold on, as Scott Ritter had thought. Basically, in the next month, this would be a wrap-up operation. And he's now looking at this situation and seeing that while Russia has ultimately been successful, more slowly than maybe people expected, in the east of Ukraine, there is a quick remilitarizing taking place in western Ukraine, and mentioned things like howitzers and things like that people didn't think they would get there, and now they're getting there. And now with this giant, price tag or giant amount of money being funneled into Ukraine, which is proportional to the entire military budget of Russia. I think Russia's military budget is about 60 billion, and now Ukraine's military budget, or the amount the U.S. is putting into Ukraine, is 40 billion, which I think amounts to about 53 billion overall since the last 2 months. Scott Ritter is now saying, "Oh, it looks like this is not just going to be a special operation, as Putin had been calling it. It looks like it's going to be a war." And particularly with the idea of Finland and Sweden now entering NATO, he's kind of claiming that unless Russia changes its strategy and escalates its position into the war, that it looks like it will lose, and that it will be drained just the way that that we suspected the U.S. was trying to do. But he was saying he did not think the U.S. would be successful, and in a sense, I think you, it's. I've always paid a price for underestimating the wits and the smarts of the U.S. ruling class and its understanding of what it is capable of doing with its power and with its money, and so he has made a reassessment. I'm grateful for that, but it has caused me to now, actually, I'll just say, I had two feelings about it. One is it was like, oh shit, it looks like the 2019 NATO scenarios, which would end in billions of people dying, is starting to come to pass. And maybe I'll say more about that later. I'll maybe read from that, because now the long war scenario is one that only Russia wins or has to escalate in order to deal with. And that Russian escalation is a very big feature of some of the war game simulations I remember reading about in the 2019 war game stuff. And so it at one level, it made me more like, oh shit, this stuff is coming to pass. And I just want to say that it had an interesting impact on me, because, as you all know, I've been talking about World War III on What's Left, and I've been saying this is the way I think capitalism is going to destroy at least the prospects of normal life for humans on the planet, or what I would describe as a normal life. And I've gone, and that's something I've said many times on this show, and I've said it to people where I've said that my fears about how things go down are not about global warming or even about environmental destruction, which I do think capitalism will rip the environment to shreds, even if I don't think global warming is the mechanism for doing it. But the way I always thought this thing would end for us was World War III. And I would have to say, reading this article and then taking this in really struck me more deeply, almost in the same way that this last year when I was at mission in August, September, walking around my room and feeling like I'm not going to be here that long. And I had that same feeling inside my body and my heart and in myself about really the reality of nuclear war, as kind of feeling inevitable and inexorable. I'm not saying it's going to happen next year. I'm not going to say it's going to happen or even this year or next year. But it's been interesting that's the effect it had on me, and I want to talk about it here. And I know that me and my family are going to visit this summer, and I want to talk with them about that. I want to talk with them about kind of, if you will, getting right with God, and just talking to people who I love about how do we deal with a world where things could end suddenly, and how do we deal with our relationships with one another in a world where things can end suddenly. So I want to start there because for whatever reason that I don't fully understand, when I read this particular article, the mental calculation of World War III went from something in my head to something a little bit deeper into my body. So sharing that, maybe that's a long-winded way of saying, what do y'all think? But what do you think about what you read? And I'm prepared to share more about the 2019 scenario and stuff like that.
I think it might be worth, just for listeners who maybe haven't read the article or haven't read it yet, to just read the last paragraph where who's the author? Mike Whitney basically makes that argument. I feel like it's concise enough that it kind of speaks to at least the, I don't know, ground level of why you might have taken it.
Okay, is this what we're looking at right here?
Yeah. So, I mean, most of the articles about Ritter's take in particular and quoting from the interview and everything, but this is basically where he ends up. So he says, in my humble opinion, Scott Ritter is gradually adjusting to the idea that the conflict in Ukraine is not just a regional skirmish between two quarrelsome neighbors, nor is it a proxy war between NATO and Russia. No, Ukraine is the first phase of a broader plan for crushing Russia, collapsing its economy, removing its leaders, seizing its natural resources, splintering its territory, and projecting US power across Central Asia to the Pacific Rim. Ukraine is about hegemony, empire, and pure unalloyed power. Most important, Ukraine is the first battle in a third world war, a war that was concocted and launched by Washington to ensure another unchallenged century of American primacy.
Yeah, I think that paragraph did get my attention.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have quite such a visceral reaction to it, and I didn't necessarily agree with. I think you kind of said this, Andy, but it kind of seemed like the writer was confused or like frustrated by Ritter, like doing the switcheroo, as he puts it. I didn't. I mean, I listened to the interview that he's referencing, and I did not get the sense that Ritter's like cheering on a world war or like an escalation in any way. I just felt like this was his assessment based on, the continually evolving situation. And I think like the distinction that Ritter's made, at least in what I've listened to, like from the beginning of his take, between what does he call it? Like a special military operation versus a full scale war is really important. And it just seems like he's responding to what he's seeing both from like a military tactics point of view, and in that realm, like I don't really know what to think because I don't know shit about military tactics. And on that, like it also wasn't, I don't know, you guys tell me what you think, but it seemed like part of what is causing him to change his take is just the sheer like amount of weaponry being funneled in, right? Like it's an insane amount of money. So there's that, but I think he said at one point in the interview, like something about Russia being unable or unwilling to kind of change their tactics and to intercept some of this material and equipment that's coming in. I don't know, like I'm curious to hear what you guys think in terms of like is it a tactical or not a tactical choice, but like is this a choice that Russia's making, or are they just like unable to deal with this level of mobilization? And I guess part of that, right, is like I remember when we were first in the first episode that we did talking about when it first kicked off, we were really focused on kind of like the special military op, like in the East, like you were talking about, Andy, like where they have been more dominant, which makes sense given the history and given the, the divide in terms of ethnic Russians and all of that. But if they're trying to just demilitarize the entire country, that's more what Ritter's describing by like a full scale war. And it is really scary because it's really hard to see that going any direction other than escalation to the point of nuclear weapons being used either by the US or Russia or NATO or whatever. So yeah, it is pretty scary.
Yeah, so on that question of whether Russia is, choosing not to go further, right, than the East, because like the perception in the news is that Russia has completely invaded Ukraine. It has like the whole country under war, but it's not. There are sections, right, the strategic sections, and that's what I think Scott Ritter refers to as like the the special operations, right? And he also mentions that if Russia was to commit, they would have to bring more troops and basically commit the full military in order to take over. And then there's also the potential of having to go into Finland, right? Because that also is another strategic point. The other guy on the interview, Ryan McGowan, I think it's the name.
Ray McGovern.
Ray McGovern. He talked about the response time, right, to like a potential missile attack. and he said that it had become like 9 minutes, right? At the time that the Russians had to respond to a potential attack. Then it went back to 30 minutes, and if the NATO and the West was able to put weapons in Finland, the response time was going to be like under 9 minutes, like 3 minutes, I think.
3 minutes.
And so that is insane, right? Like that is almost ensures an attack, and then it becomes all out war because the Russians have to respond. And
and just I don't want to interrupt you, but just to be clear, and that's a really important point you're raising, Kenny. That question of 3 minutes is all around the idea of a first strike that would knock out the military capability of. That question of time is important when you have two military opponents. Can you knock your military opponent, the other nuclear power's ability to mount another nuclear response out? And so by bringing that time down to 3 minutes, they said that means Russia has to automate its response. And the automation of its response means you're taking it out of human hands. And he had mentioned an event in 1983 where the US was doing a war games thing that Russia thought was did not know was a war game, and it led to a near nuclear confrontation. And that was human intervention that stopped it. So that thing you're saying is a big deal.
No, it reminds me a little bit of the automation that has happened in Wall Street, in trading, and how it just gets out of hand, real quick. And we've been talking in this show about automation, and this is one of those implications, right, in the field of war, where things can happen real quick, and if things are automated, at that point, no one has control of anything. And then so again, to your question, Jessica, I don't know. I almost feel that I don't know for certain. I almost feel like the Russians are actually being tentative because they didn't mount the full-scale war. Because I do think, and that is I think the argument that was made by Scott a little bit, that they're trying to lure Russia into a prolonged war. That's what the funding is about, right? That's the argument. That's why it's not about stopping a war. It's not about just ending the war and coming to like an agreement in sorts. I do think this has a long-term strategic point, because like we talked about the Russia-China alliance. That's really important. We've talked about how China doesn't have the military muscle, and also like the geopolitical positioning. Russia is important in I guess the prospects of China becoming the hegemon and gaining enough strength to stand on its own feet. And so again, like Ukraine, and that's the argument that Scott is making. It's not just about lives, right? Like it's not just about Ukrainian lives. We've discussed here that the U.S. and the West has willingly sacrificed Ukrainian lives. They don't care about them, and they actually push the hand of Russia. But listening to Scott and listening to the interview, for the first time, I also had a similar reaction to you, Libsyn, of the real possibility of things getting out of hand. Because I don't agree with Scott in the sense that he says that there is a new, what did he say? There's new people in charge that are basically maniacs, right? They do want to use nuclear power. And I think I don't know particular about Scott, but I do think overall in society, there is this almost arrogant assumption that we're beyond that period of the Cold War. There is this assumption that things will take care of themselves, right? But what scares me is not even about these maniacs doing this stuff. They've always been there. They will always be there. What scares me is the level of compliance, obviously, that we've talked about, the level of disengagement, the level of removal of this very realistic scenario in my mind, and the lack of any sort of anti-war effort, right? Even as cynical as I am about just demonstrations, to be honest, like that to me is not enough in general. It's just I usually call it a Disney-fied slogan demonstration. Even as cynical as I am about that, it's still a demonstration of some sort of interest and awareness, but there is zero concern. There is full commitment to show sympathy for Ukraine. There's plenty of flags in San Francisco, of Ukrainian flags. And through the Jimmy Dore show, I found out that Biden is going into Somalia again, and so, no one's saying anything about that. But that's also about a strategic point. And there is an offensive that's being mounted by the West, in the US especially, because the US is the one who's going to be challenged by China. We know that's coming. That clash is coming at some point. Just like you said, Lipson, we don't know if it's next year, the following year, in 5 years, the next decade, but it will come. It will come soon in some form. And Scott argues, and I do agree with him in that point, that this is the first act of the Third World War. Because I did not envision all the domino effect that it's had. Now we're talking about Finland. Now we're talking about Sweden. Now we're talking about more weapons in the area. Now we're talking automation of our response. And so, you have to be really oblivious to not see how there is a potential, right, for things to get out of hand real quick where we don't have a say. Right, and me being a revolutionary socialist, this is why, again, is the impetus that we have to take control. We have to take over. We have to take down our own governments. These maniacs who probably think they will be safe in a bunker somewhere, or probably think that they can win, and just like Scott expressed, that they think that I guess their answer is to be the bigger bully. Right? It's not about de-escalating. There is no, I don't think there's room for that, and if anything, I do think the Russians might be showing a little more restraint, because from the beginning, because I do think they are aware of their limited, capacity to engage in a prolonged war. And so they have to weigh these things. And, China is not fully there to back them up yet. But at the same time, they don't have another option but to push back, ready to punch back and try to be strategic about it. But I think that the money that the West is dumping in shows what the West is about. I'm not even for me, it's not even about Russia. It's what the West is doing, because they are ready to carry this shit out for a while. They are ready to mount an attack. They're ready to say, oh, come on, Finland, come on, Sweden. When Russia has publicly stated, right, don't push up on our borders. That's the reason they went to war in Ukraine. Forget denazification, forget, that demilitarization is a thing. They have to. They can't have people on their borders. And I don't think it's just about history. It's not just about Napoleon. It's not just about the Nazis. It's about their future. And it's not just about some, evil maniac, who is irrational, right? It's actually a very rational response to an attack. They're sacrificing. Everyone is sacrificing the Ukrainians, and this is the first act. So we don't know who else will be sacrificed in the next round of that proxy war, because the head-on conflict might come later. But just like the Cold War, just like the World Wars, the people who pay the price are the domino piece in the middle, and Ukraine is one of these. And so Finland may be the next one, Sweden, and the ones that border Russia. But I don't know. I guess my point is that I am concerned. Things are escalating very quickly. When we first talked about Ukraine, we didn't think it would go to this far, and it has gone well beyond anything I could have predicted. And I'm learning, about the details of the strategic military moves that are happening, and that is telling me that you better get ready for a prolonged conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that Russia has probably shown a restraint in its offensive actions that Scott Ritter would say that was a mistake. You needed to go more aggressive. And I didn't know this. Both he and McGovern mentioned in the interview that Putin had gone to Biden and was in December of 2021. December of 2021 to try to reach an agreement on phone that, something's going to have to be figured out here in Ukraine. And Biden had made an agreement, gentleman's agreement to do so. And then they say, oh, the U.S. went back on its word again, and Ritter said, look, you cannot trust the United States, and the U.S. is full of liars and things like that. That's true about Russia. That's true about China. That is just true about diplomacy. You know, like it's true about the nation states. I would say under capitalism, they have to. I mean, if I'm playing a game of Risk against Kenny and Jessica, I win that game by lying to you. Like, and I win that game by telling you lies, but doing things that want to make you think that I'm being truthful and that I can be trusted, so I can turn on you at the last moment when you're not ready. That's how the game is played, and I do believe that that's the game that is playing, the global game that's being played, and that's largely, you know, Risk and Monopoly. If you put them together, in my mind, are games that describe how capitalism works, roughly. And the other thing he said that I thought was interesting was that the lesson learned by China, because they have eyes on Taiwan, is if you go hard and go strong, and like you have to knock them out soon, because if you don't, the other side is going to get in there and start to bleed you with time again. So that was interesting to me to hear that. And I agree with you, Kenny. It's not about maniacs. Maniacs can't think straight, and I don't think we have Russian leaders who are maniacs. I don't think we have U.S. leaders who are maniacs. They might seem like maniacs, but if what you and I, Kenny, say about capitalism is true, and I'm not saying you don't think this, Jessica. I'm just saying Kenny and I have gone on record here as saying, like, we think this is not NWO. This is not a New World Order thing. This is not a global cabal. This is a global capitalist system eating itself in a competitive frenzy. But if the game is based on competition, then if you are going to try to win that game, you better have people who only think in terms of, we will win this game, and who will be true believers in thinking they will win this game. Because if you don't have those people who think they can win, they will lose. And if they lose, like, there is no loss in capitalism. Loss just means you get smashed and eaten up by a monopoly. That's what it means economically. And politically, it means your nation gets subsumed under another nation, who is the winner. Because there's no neutrality under capitalism. You either advance and are taking somebody else down, or you are being taken down. That's the case in the marketplace, and that's the case, I would say, in the globe. And I think the NWO people look and see these maniacs and think that they're hanging out in like secret society cabals, and I don't think that's what's going on. I think they perceived as maniacs because they believe they can win in a system that ultimately, I would say, cannot be won because of crisis. It will collapse in on itself, and it will destroy humanity in the process, ultimately. So that's what makes them seem crazy, but that's just the situation. The system is crazy, and the people who are going to try to win that game will have to be kind of nuts themselves. But I think they are extremely bright and intelligent, and they know how power is managed clearly, like in ways that I don't like. I'm an infant comparison to these people, and I think we're seeing that. But I don't think it can work, because I do think it's a global competitive system.
Yeah. Or Kenny, I don't know. You raised your hand like you had. You can go first if you want.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I always think back to history, right? And like, again, I do think there is some sort of arrogance that we've moved beyond. We're more aware, and that, like, and the point what I wanted to make is that we've also brought this up in a previous episode, where we've said that it took 2 world wars, right, for Great Britain to capitulate, to the U.S. basically, the U.S. becoming the hegemon of the world. It took 2 world wars, massive death, massive display of the latest technology, for winning the wars, and it also took 2 atomic bombs, for the U.S. to ensure its power. And like I think that people feel that the nuclear threat was only during the Cold War, right? Like, and maybe we're a generation removed from that, but I think it's very much alive, and it's and then Scott Ritter made that point that the U.S. is an empire in decline, and and this empire is different than all the other empires, than the British Empire. This empire has 800 plus military bases around the world. This is a global situation. We know history, right, of civilizations, quote unquote, that collapse, right, for different reasons. But this one is a global one, that is very much connected. And so in refusing to give its power willingly, he argues, and I agree with him, the U.S. will take down the whole damn world with it, rather than just give up, power by itself. And that is how empires go down, violent deaths.
But I don't know. I was just thinking about like the public perception of like if this is turning into a full scale war. But then for my part, like I don't know, I've in some ways had trouble taking it super seriously from like a World War III type of scenario, just because like we keep seeing like all our politicians are like being flown out there for photo ops with Zelensky, like Nancy Pelosi's like this is supposed to be a war zone, I don't know. So I think that's I don't know. It's just weird, and I mean it obviously like so much of it is just what like fake image can we prop up for the American public so that they're not gonna whatever surround the White House and say stop giving our fucking tax money to Nazis. But yeah, and then so on the whole sort of global nation state competition thing, I did just want to come back because Kenny had brought up Somalia, right? And obviously it's just a great example of the hypocrisy, right? Especially of the American left, because nobody's really talking about it or covering it, or not nobody, but most people aren't covering it. Certainly the mainstream's not covering it. Nobody's got, solidarity. I stand with Somalia flags or whatever. But I wanted to bring up this article that I saw. I think it was Wyatt Reed that posted it a couple days ago about so the U.S. The headline is the U.S. seeks to pass law to monitor Russia's activities in Africa. So apparently this went through the Senate and last month, April 27th. So pretty recently. United States seeking to pass a law to counter Russia in Africa by tracking its military operations, investments, oligarchs, and suspected illicit financial flows. Blah, blah. We can link it below so people can check out the full article. I just thought it was interesting, like this whole, like I guess most of the African nations, right, refused to join the whole like Putin evil charade. And so now, like, basically, we want to put through this legislation to like hold accountable sovereign African governments who are like complicit, or I mean, probably like just even allegedly complicit in like aiding Russian influence, right? And obviously it's not a coincidence. It's just another example of how, from the American perspective, like it does not look like we are expecting this to be some sort of short-lived thing. I mean, obviously the weaponry, right? Like that is a huge cash cow for the weapons industry. That's nothing new, but I just thought it was an interesting, just in terms of like the global environment. And there's also, I'm thinking about how China, right, is obviously very interested and involved in creating trade relationships and accessing African oil and gas, all of that kind of stuff, which obviously from global like competitor thing, like it's like, oh, we want that gas, right? Which I'm sure is part of why we're sending troops back into Somalia, right? And again, like it's the left that's doing it. Trump had actually pulled them out, and so now they're being redeployed to supposedly, I don't even know. Like, Kenny, do you even know what the like supposed reason is? Is it just democracy or spread democracy?
It's about terrorism, according to them. Al-Shabaab, I think it's the group that they're.
Oh, okay, yeah. So like Al-Shabaab's linked to Al-Qaeda or like.
Yeah. And so that's kind of like the premise. And I think that it was about, they were using that 2001 act, right? Like the whatever terrorism act to have war powers and stuff. That's what I heard at least, but I don't entirely know. But I do think what you're saying makes sense, that there is that angle, right? That Africa will be a terrain of contention, and there will be a new repartition in some sort of way. There already is. There has been. China has hints in there. The U.S. wants to make sure they're in there because it's not. For me at least, sorry, I don't know if you.
No, you go for it. Go for it.
And then it's not just, it's about people, right? We talked about data mining. It's about resources. It's about also Somalia. It's on the Gulf, right? Like it's trade routes, and I also wonder how that plays with India too. Like through that route, because India hasn't come into the picture, into focus here, but India I think is going to have to choose at some point what side they're on. But yeah, I mean, it's scary because again, I think we're going to see more pieces move on the chessboard, and I don't even know. I'm just catching up. Like things are moving really fast.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the stuff on Somalia, which I didn't know about, to me, and I didn't know how much they were making the language around Russia, but I don't make a distinction between the U.S. talking about taking on or monitoring Russia and U.S. monitoring China. So I look at what the U.S. is doing in Somalia and militarizing and creating a larger military presence in Somalia as an attempt to again fight the great game in Africa in relationship to China. And so that's what I see there. And I think my take on the photo op stuff is it's actually a photo op, yes, but it represents politicians who are the faces of these states saying we are committed to this country, we are committed to this cause. So those aren't small things when they go there and do that. And they're basically saying, we feel safe here because we're going to make it safe here, even if we know that your country's at war. We are prepared to make, even if you're not in NATO, to say this is going to be a place where U.S. politicians can come and do photo ops because we're not going to let you get taken over by an empire. We are going to be part of defending you. So to me, that's the way the United States says in a photo op, we're committed, we're all in. And in addition, there's $40 billion they voted on that not a single Democrat, including all the squad and all of them voted for it. The only ones who voting against it were some marginalized Republicans, because most of the Republican establishment is with it. The U.S. establishment is with this whole thing. There was some marginal Republicans, or seen on the fringe, who were called Putin lovers and Putin supporters for opposing this thing, or for even presenting opposition to it. So that just shows me the U.S. is committed. I guess I want to share the thing, because it does appear that Kenny and I have had kind of the same kind of like, whoa, this is coming in, like this notion of the inevitability of this thing is come in on us more deeply maybe than it has you, Jessica. And I think that's interesting. And I want to read this thing from the 2019 War Game stuff. So let me share my screen. And I also, when I read it, I was talking to my brother who's been doing these podcast listenings to World War I and World War II. And it's something he had mentioned that I knew was true, and I've seen is true, is that people often try to talk about what could have been done for World War I to not happen, what could have been done toward World War II. And in each case, the pieces as they move into place, there's nothing that could have been done. If the moves that were made in all cases, in order by each of the parties involved, were the only moves they could make if they really had a plan, if they really had a chain, if they really thought they were going to win and survive and expand and go on. And if they didn't make those moves, that meant they were giving up. And that's not a good move unless you're prepared to surrender. And they only surrender when they're fully defeated, right? So I feel that same way. There's this inexorableness about every move that's being made, as Russia now must be more aggressive in Western Ukraine, and if Finland is invited in, Russia must engage Finland in the war and draw them into that war, or else they have missiles 3 minutes from, or they invite the situation. And in fact, NATO, being a NATO member, means Finland kind of has to be prepared to put things which are called defense missiles, but which can be readily turned into offense missiles. And Russia knows that, so it's not like these people don't know this stuff. So I want to read this. This was from the article about that I had read early on. NATO intervention in Ukraine could spark nuclear war. Here's how it could happen. And setting the scene for war. The scenario the group decided to test back in late 2019 was similar to today. Russia decided to invade Ukraine under the excuse that it must defend Russian-speaking peoples that are being oppressed by Ukrainian fascist government. In our scenario, we assume Russia performs far more admirably than it does today, but has more limited objectives, in that Moscow wants to connect Crimea to separatist regions in the eastern Ukraine that are under its effective control. We assumed that Russia does that quickly, achieving most of its military objectives in roughly 4 days. But Ukraine does not give up so easily. Just like in real life today, Ukrainian forces, after taking heavy losses, mount an impressive counterattack, whereby Russia loses over 100 tanks and over 2,500 soldiers. Images on social media, whatever. Putin is outraged. He thought Ukraine would simply roll over, but he does not factor into his calculus the nearly decades-long training Kiev received from the US and NATO, nor the Ukrainians' military buildup for the last several years that was focused on this scenario. Russia then decides that its limited military objectives were a mistake and that all Ukraine must be demilitarized. Moscow then launches a massive ballistic and cruise missile strike, followed up by Russia's Air Force launching its own shock and awe campaign, destroying a vast majority of Ukraine's command and control structure, Air Force, air defense, and armor units in the process. At the same time, Russia starts surging troops to the borders of Ukraine in what looks like an imminent general invasion and occupation of the entire country. They call this the spark. And this is, again, the war game simulation, how it went. Here's why things turn for the worse. Here's where things turn for the worse. A Russian ballistic missile guidance system fails and crash lands into NATO member Poland, killing 34 civilians as it tragically lands into a populated village along the Polish-Ukraine border. While the missile was not directed at Poland intentionally, pictures on social media show, it gets built up. To its credit, Poland, which has its own tortured history with the Soviet Union and Russia, does its best to show restraint while not responding with its own military. It leads an effort to see Moscow pay a steep price for its aggression in Ukraine and actions, even unintentional, in Poland. Warsaw leads a diplomatic and economic boycott of Moscow, resulting in Russia being kicked out of SWIFT, as well as direct sanctions on Russian banks, similar to what we are seeing today. In our scenario, Russia's reaction is also swift. Moscow decides to launch a massive cyber attack on Poland, having based cyber warriors all throughout NATO territory, using their geography and proxy servers to mask the origin of the attack. Russia, in just 2 hours, takes offline Poland's entire electrical grid, banking sector, energy plants, and more, essentially taking Poland back in the Stone Age. And this is where the nightmare begins. Even though attribution is hard to achieve, Poland appeals to NATO and starts to privately share its desire to invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter, declaring that an attack on one is an attack on the entire alliance. NATO is worried, and there is a debate on how far to punish Russia, while also feeling as if they do not have a clear military objective amongst the member states, as some want to respond to what happened to Poland, while others feel they must intervene militarily in Ukraine. Here's where NATO surprises everyone. The alliance decides to set up a limited no-fly zone around the Ukrainian city of Lviv to protect innocent civilians and refugees that are trapped and have nowhere to go. Russia is warned. NATO is not intervening in the conflict, but will ensure that its planes and airspace around Lviv are protected. NATO does make it clear its jets will be in the skies about Ukraine, but will not operate from Ukrainian territory. In Moscow, Putin now gets a sense that NATO is destined to intervene on Ukrainian side. Russia fears NATO will use this protected corridor as a base of operations to send ever more sophisticated weapons. And with its economy now in a tailspin due to sanctions, Putin feels the walls closing in on him. Before NATO can impose a no-fly zone, Putin orders strikes on any remaining airfields and military assets around Lviv. He says, here's where Putin miscalculates and sets the stage for NATO-Russia war. Putin orders another massive cyber attack on the Baltic states' military infrastructure, thinking NATO will use the Baltics to stage an invasion of Russia. This ends up being the last straw for NATO, which then decides direct intervention in Ukraine is necessary to push back against Russian aggression. Before even an announcement is made, Russian intelligence sees missiles and troops movements that indicate an impending NATO attack and decide to first strike with tactical nuclear weapons. NATO decides to respond in kind. Russia then targets European cities with nuclear weapons, with NATO and America also responding in kind. What is left is nothing short of an apocalypse, with what we estimate is 1 billion people dead. That was probably a longer reading than necessary, but again, there were features of this. Maybe when I do the editing, I'll maybe cut some of the part, but there are just features of this that resonate with what I see happening here. There's no mention of Finland in this war game, but the war is going longer. The war is extending itself. The war is broadening. And the last part, the highlight that you saw here at the end, no war goes as planned. There are so many more opportunities now for strange things to happen that can lead to just a series of dominoes that they just kind of passively go, well, Russia does a NATO nuclear strike, NATO has to respond, cities get nuked, 1 billion people dead. What are you going to do? But
what year was this put out?
2019. You know, and it was the thing that was interesting is that the simulations they did all seem to generally go in this direction. Like they all seem to go towards nuclear war, hundreds of millions, billions dead, you know, and they know this. And so they know this, and yet they are determined to see this through, to see if they can find that one. It's like the goddamn Infinity War, where Doctor Strange says there's one way to beat Thanos. You know, we're going to do this. We're going to find that one way to beat Thanos. The U.S. is going to do this and find this one way to beat the odds, where they defeat their enemies and the world is not incinerated. And that apparently is the task they've set before themselves.
I guess I have a question just from my own ignorance of not having studied military history and war games super closely, but are these simulations historically, what are they? I know what their professed purpose is, but what actually is there? Is it to cultivate a certain type of public perception? Is it have they been used to fearmonger? Are they usually predictive in an accurate way? I mean, it sounds a lot of it's spooky. And I know with the health stuff, right? We've seen that come true, right? In a very short turnaround.
Yes.
So is it similar?
I think you could say that. You could say that. I mean, most of these things are not publicized, although there was a recent war game simulation that was literally put up on NBC between China and the United States.
I saw a little bit of that one.
You know, but this one wasn't. It's not like a lot of people have been hearing about this. So the general idea is that they hire people to play the U.S. side, to say what the U.S. is capable of doing, and then you hire people to be NATO, and you hire people to be Russia, and then you say be smart and try to win this game. So what moves do you make? And so they're attempting to try to prepare for the kinds of moves their opponent might make. As you notice, they hire these people to be smart, but in the press and in the media, they talk about these people like they're madmen. They know that they are not. They are hiring the smartest people who know what military strategy, who know how to win wars and how all this stuff is done. And that's who they think their opponents are behind the scenes. But to us, they have to talk about them like they're crazy.
And at least for me, what informs the likely scenario of this is what I think of capitalism, right? And just also listening to history or reading history, and just the inevitable clashes, right? When one power wants to replace another power, And so in my mind, it's coming, like, I don't know if it's like this will be the exact scenario. It's likely, and quite honestly, I don't think anyone can fully predict, the exact time frame or the exact, way things are gonna develop. You can take a guess, right? And like this is a good guess because we're seeing things unfold in front of us, and it's about how quickly they can devolve into something, very catastrophic. Um, in again because my own understanding of capitalism and the system and how it works, and this is again where we deviate with people we've had in our show, right? Like, or people that argue the new world order and these like unified forces making decisions to I guess deceive us into like sacrifice some people in order to deceive us to for the big plan. And I don't think there is a big plan. Everyone's like has their own plans. They're competing to impose their own plan, and that's why shit gets out of hand. And that's why we said that there's no one really driving the bus, because at one point or another, all these people who are very smart, like, and like Gibson said, their job is to advance the interest of their own, of their own people. Um, all those decisions add up to something catastrophic because they just have to, it keeps escalating, it gets out of hand, and at some point you can't back down. And that's why I'm like, this could be it, maybe not, but I'm still holding my breath, waiting for the situation. But it is very concerning, because like even like countries, right, that have historically, quote unquote, been neutral, are coming into the fold real quick, in what we know, like I think I think it's hard to say that the U.S. has a strong hand, like that the U.S. is not losing power in the world. It's really hard to argue against that, I think, personally. And we know that China is rising, in its own way, and in like I'm not even like I don't know how much I actually agree with like the scenario where Russia is the aggressor with a nuclear bomb. It doesn't have to be Russia, you know what I mean? And like, but I don't know. I guess my point is like yes, there is some logic, but at some point it's just it just hell. It just hell breaks loose, and even the smartest people who think they can control some shit, especially when it's automated, it's fucking game over. And that's why I cited this. That's why I think it's important to understand the implications of AI in this whole system. And because it's still under human control and human, and again, like the people who are programming these systems are programming the systems to win. In order to win, you can't win being nice in this game. You can't win being humanitarian. You can't win being, not being sexist, not being racist. You have to be everything. You have to be, fucking go read Machiavelli. People have it. You know what I mean? Like you can't be what was it? Like if you can be loved and feared, that's great. But if you have to choose one or the other, you better be feared. That's better for governing the world. And like I do think the facade of the US is like as a humanitarian bullshit, like it's gonna come down very soon because they're gonna have to show its fucking brutality even more, naked brutality. And so I'm not saying that Russia is like a complete victim. Hell no. They have their own interests, but they are being pushed into a corner. And it's not even about Russia to me. Again, we've made this point already. But Russia does have the capability of of participating in the common destruction of the world. It's funny because it brings me back to Nicaragua when I lived there for 2 years. And the Russian military, a lot of people who are in the military in Nicaragua have studied in Russia. A lot of them speak Russian. There's a lot of Russian weaponry. And, like I remember my friends making this argument, oh, Russians are badass, they could kick the US ass. And I remember making the argument, like, really, it doesn't fucking matter. like they'll destroy everyone, and like there won't be, if they get into a big fight, it doesn't matter that Russia is better or smaller, they have nuclear capacity, and then it's game over. If like just say a few bombs can wreak havoc in the world. And like, because people talk about like the thousands of nuclear bombs, versus these thousands of nuclear bombs. You don't need 1,000, to wreak havoc. You just need a couple, and at some point, like, when people attack you, you lose even, you lose rationality. Like if people attack you, even the very, people that are being governed are going to ask for the response.
So if we're looking at this from not from a New World Order, like centralized framework, and rather as, like you said, Kenny, like different players playing to win. Like who in your guys' view, I'm like trying to play neutral here, even though in this whole scenario, clearly the US is not accepting neutrality and from anyone, anywhere. But who benefits from a nuclear war? Like, I mean, because from a New World Order framework, I suppose there's this sort of like eugenicist, like, we need to eliminate a certain percentage of the world's population, blah, blah, blah. And I know you guys are describing it as like getting out of hand, right? Like, yeah, I mean, obviously, like no one wins. But at the same time, we're talking about these people like, no, they're not stupid. It's silly to underestimate them. So I don't know. I guess I'm having a little trouble like squaring those two thoughts. Like, who really wants that or doesn't not want it enough to actually pull the trigger? Like if we were to detonate another nuclear.
What we're saying, at least what I think could happen is what was discussed in that scenario, right? An accident, or some shit that just it's like wasn't predicted in their own games, right? What do you call in their analysis, some shit that just happens, right? Just like, I don't know, there's been moments in history, right, where people are pointing at each other and someone shoots the first bullet, and then it just becomes, a shootout. And that's kind of what I see. It's not even that. It's just that you have to front, it's like, and you have to show strength, and then an accident could happen. We've run through these scenarios during the Cold War, right, where like humans actually prevented nuclear war from happening because there were mistakes that happened. Bombs fell and they didn't fucking blow up, out of the sky. Like right now, shit is moving around the world. I'm sure of that. Like, weapons are moving around the world. We know it for a fact in Ukraine, but, even Scott Ritter talked about, like, the US, for example, establishing a base in the Black Sea. It involves Lithuania. We talked about Finland. And so the gearing up for, you cannot wait. You cannot sit back and wait. You have to be proactive. And in being proactive, you create tension, and that's what I mean. Like one bad incident can trigger a shootout, and then no one wins. And so I don't know. Like that's the scenario I see. And if nuclear wars are used, then I mean, do you want to wait for the nuclear fallout on this? Even if the bombs are not dropped here, like, it's going to affect us, in a massive way.
Yeah, and I assume, Jessica, that I think you are coming more from that globalist framework, that correct, in terms of how you understand what's going on. I'm making an assumption that's inaccurate.
I don't know. I feel push and pull every week.
Okay. Well, the reason I say that is because it's not really a question of who wins. The question posed to our rulers is, how will we win? That is the question they must answer. And I believe I believe they're competing. And it's not how we win over how do we as a global elite who are all working together, how do we win over and there is that question of how do we smash our people? That's part of winning. But I do believe they're in a competition whose goal is to say, our job is to figure out how to win. And so they know China's nuclear armed, they know Russia's nuclear armed, and they know Russia and China seem to be coming together from a sense of a threat from the West and from the United States. So the question to the US rulers is, how do we win? I think they're asking that question, and I think we're starting to see how they think they're going to do it, which is push Russia to the brink, and at the same time force European people who are on the fence, or European countries who are on the fence, to align closer to us as we choose sides. Ritter also mentioned that all the success U.S. is having in Europe, China is having that success in the South Pacific and the Philippines, in sections of Asia, building their kind of consolidating an empire there. But if they can do that, then if the U.S. can put their missiles just close enough to a situation where they are first strike capable, then you win by knocking out your opponent's forces, because you know that you can't risk losing in a nuclear war. You must win the nuclear war. So first strike is the way you would do that. So that's the situation the U.S. is putting itself in. But the war gamers know that if the other side gets to a place where they're in that first strike threshold, they can't get there, because then they lose. So Russia cannot allow itself to get to a place where its enemy is capable of doing a first strike that can knock out itself. So then Russia has to act before that happens, because if they wait, then it's over. And so it's not a question of who will win out of such a thing. The question that's posed to each ruling class is, how will we win? And that's what the U.S. is doing. And the problem is that they're not in control of the process. They can ask the question, how we win, but they're not in control of the outcome of the game. If they were, I personally believe that this was NWO stuff, I would feel a sense of relief, knowing that inevitably, if Putin was serious, he would be taken down, like internally, in the way that we see that happens within the U.S. ruling class when they take out one of their guys. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think if there's a takedown, it's going to happen either from a country who gets first struck and is not able to act in response to it, or who won't allow that to happen and then chooses to strike first out of the last ditch effort to not lose.
And at least for me too, is because that I guess that's one of my problems with like the New World Order analysis, right? Is that this assumption, right? Like it's kind of like the neoliberal project. Like if people have economic ties, they won't have any incentive to fight each other or to bring the world to that point. But I actually expect, because I think this is a partition. This is where people are starting to choose sides, and we're gonna see some of those ties maybe loosen up, and people like nation states become more guarded about like their technology or their capabilities. I expect that, and yeah, because again, it is a competitive game ultimately, and ultimately it's about your people, your class, your business, and your power. And there is one thing that underwrites this system, and really every system that has existed in the history is violence. And whoever has the biggest hammer will win. Has potentially, that has the potential of winning the game. And you have to wield that hammer. And at some point, and I think that maybe what has happened. We are so removed from that, the memory. We know it from the history books. So those two atomic bombs, and I don't know. I'm just thinking that maybe we're too removed from that, and that it is possible, and yeah. I mean, I just don't think anyone is really driving the bus, and economic ties are not enough. Capital is not loyal to to life. Capital is loyal to power, to winning, and to being the dominant force in whether it's the marketplace or global politics.
Well, you guys are just a bundle of joy. Is there a scenario? Apparently, I'm just interviewing you guys at this point.
Yeah.
Is there a scenario that you can feasibly imagine where this doesn't escalate to nuclear war? Like, especially in light of that, opening piece, that the article that we looked at.
Not with the system intact as it is. The only way I see this not inevitably happening is a revolution. Governments are going to have to be taken down, and systems of how the globe operates are going to have to be dismantled at the same time. It's not enough to replace them with, obviously, the Bernie Sanders.
I can't believe that piece of shit just voted for $40 billion worth of weapons.
Penny, were you going to say something?
Yeah. So we talked. You just said, like, again, that's really our only kind of option. We've talked about taking override power and deciding things and messing shit up for the people who are ruling. And historically, I think there is again somewhere that some anthropologists talked about that the pattern in civilizations that collapse was the disconnect of the ruling class and the people governed. And so we're gonna have to take over and govern ourselves, or and understand. And I do think, I mean, like, I know it's a tall task. It is, most people I talk to, they don't see it at all. Like my friends, they told me, Kenny, this country's big. How are you gonna bring people together? And I'm thinking, fucking India, 300 million people strike, and then, like, I guess we have to uneducate ourselves, I guess, and realize the power that we have collectively, right? That's the reason I think I am a socialist, because I believe in that collective power. I'm not saying that it's easy, or even, I have to believe it's possible. I have to. Otherwise, again, like, I'm just gonna be a nihilist and not, and just say, shit, it goes to hell. Like, I believe in people, in good nature, and in that we can take over. These people who think they're smarter than us, who are the quote unquote experts, but are playing this dangerous game. And that's why I'm a communist, right? Because I believe in community, not like the state running bullshit. No, I believe in community and the power of knowing each other and the power of understanding each other. I believe in humanity, like in the power of caring for each other, so fuck this right wing, left wing, binary. It's like, I see you hurting, I care about you. I see you getting fucked up, I care about you, not just looking and by the side and not doing anything. So that's why I talk about this shit. And that's why I have to be real. Like, this is what I think could happen. So we better get our shit together and do something different. Take control of our own lives, our own intellect. Because, like, that's the reason I'm incessant about this shit with my family, with everyone, because I think people can understand. Like, sometimes we've been taught that we're not experts, so we don't even want to engage in a topic. We don't even want to ask questions. We don't want to have an opinion, but you have to if you want to change this world. And I think enough people are, at least around me, are breaking down, like, mentally, physically, spiritually, in all ways. That should be enough to, like, to say something doesn't add up, some shit doesn't add up. So fight those fuckers who want to push the conspiracy theories. If you have some ideas that don't add up to the mainstream bullshit, that's what we have this show, right? And so I want to believe in that, and like, if we go fucking down, I want to go down fighting. Like, I want to go down giving it, like, a fucking hell, of a try, in order to fucking shift things. Like, yeah, it's gloomy, and it's very likely that could happen. It's been in the fucking cards for decades now, like the nuclear prospect, and I think it's ramping up again. But again, I want to believe in people who believe in community and want to show up for each other. But if you want to be an individualistic asshole who, like, wants to complain, be my fucking guest. But I'll try to dance, with people, even if fucking blows up.
Yeah, I'll be curious to hear what comes of those conversations you were talking about having with your family, Andy, because I feel like where we've ended up, especially with everything Kenny just said, kind of brings us back to like what we were talking about originally doing for this week, is this question of like, how do you build a movement? How do you build resistance? What does activism look like? Like, how do you make a revolution or community making, whatever label you want to slap on it? Because I mean, I share that base hope in humanity, and yeah, it's like the description you gave for like why you're a communist is sort of similar for me, and why I'm more sort of like an anarchist. You know, everybody associates that word with chaos and violence and kind of like the individualistic, like every man for himself or whatever. But to me, like at base, it's more actually about believing in humanity's innate capability to provide mutual aid and to get along and to build our own societies without a state. Like, I don't believe that we actually need that in order to live in a healthy and happy and sustainable way. I actually think we're quite capable. That said, I mean, you're looking at these timelines with that War Games thing, with Scott Ritter's assessment. I mean, every direction you look, it's like, I mean, we're at like 11:59 here. It feels like, how, you know, and I'm just thinking about even the lockdowns, which, okay, it's not on the level of a nuclear war, you know, and I'm trying to actually imagine, like, if the US were to be, you know, the first aggressor, you know, what would the reaction be? Like, then what? Right? On our, obviously it's going to be massive death and destruction in the area where that weapon is deployed, in the surrounding area, and I'm sure there would be repercussions all over the world. But I mean, I don't even know. But the lockdowns, like, we're talking about millions and millions of people being thrown, you know, very quickly, like, into poverty, being deprived of just the most basic things. Yes, like all around the world, in the global south especially, but also here in America. I mean, it's pretty crazy, like, just the escalation and just the resistance that all of us have encountered trying to build some kind of just like basic community of resistors, I guess. Oh my god, I like just thinking about that in the context of a timeline. It's pretty scary. It's a pretty tall order.
Yeah.
I had more, I don't know,
Yeah.
strategy, I guess.
I mean, you are absolutely right, Jessica, that this episode has ended where the episode we were planning on having would in some ways pick up, you know, like, okay, what do we do now? And I don't think we're not going to have that conversation fully right now. But I guess what I would say is, as I've said before, I think I'm not optimistic. I agree with Kenny. If I was completely hopeless, I wouldn't be doing what's left, and I wouldn't be trying to go to the farmers market and talking to people and doing whatever I'm trying to do to like build community and build networks from the base. But like you said, Jessica, what you have laid out as to what we've experienced in these last 2 years has not given me much. I wasn't particularly confident 2 years ago about the prospects for revolution. My confidence is pretty much lower 2 years on about the prospects for revolution, at least around me. But I will say, and this was, you know, I talk to a counselor every 2 weeks. And I was talking about the conversation I want to have with my family this summer, which is not just what's our plan. But I want to talk about, like, okay, what if this isn't the last time we're meeting? Could we treat this like the last time we're meeting? Is that a crazy thing to do when all of us, my mom, my brother, my sister-in-law, my wife, all know what's happening right now and all see a similar dangerous world? Should we take for granted this meeting we're having this summer? And I would say no. But my counselor was pointing, I don't know if my counselor sees it the same way, but he did point out, he basically said that conversation that you might want to have, even if other people are thinking about plans, and I'm sort of thinking about, like I said, getting right with God, with my family, and with people I love, is we all are going to die, regardless of nuclear war or not. we are all here only for a limited time. And so it is important to cherish and to try to remind ourselves about how important the people in our lives are. So that's what I think about. And I think if I can start from there, that's not about resistance per se. In some ways it is, because it's about humanity. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is to say, these fuckers are willing to destroy the world in a nuclear war. Whatever. It is still a gift to be alive. It is still a gift to be connected to people. And it's worth us reminding ourselves of that with the people we love. So.
Yeah. And, you know, just to echo that, and while doing that, you know, for me, it's also about being honest, you know, like with where we stand about things, you know, and why. And I think that, you know, everyone in the show, you know, a lot of people that we've talked about, like everyone's an amazing human, you know, in their own way, you know, and like, and we don't all fully agree with every topic, you know, but we care, and we care enough to try to do something about it. And I think that, you know, that's at least my hope, that can be that level of care, right, for our peers, our families, and, you know, in our convictions. Maybe that will light some shit up. I mean, you know, like maybe, and that's the only hope you have. Like, you know, to me, that's something I've had to learn myself, you know, through organizing and all this shit that it's not just up to me. It's not. I'm trying to do my part. And if I have to go this, you know, and I jokingly say that with my friends and my brother, you know, it's I want my tombstone to say, I fucking tried. You know, and like, I don't know, it's not just up to me. I definitely know that. And like, that takes some burden off of me. You know, I'm just doing my part and try to not lose myself in it, I guess.
Yeah, word. You guys said
it. Well, anyway, I'm glad we talked about this. I'm grateful, Jessica, that I met you and know you. I definitely hope to meet you before the nuclear bombs go off in Oregon or in California. And Kenny and I will have to probably do another walk to the woods, things like that.
Funny enough, I'm about to finish the Parable of the Sword. You haven't read that book? You should read it. It's about this dystopian world and people who are trying to create a new society. The shit is burning. People are, you know, this in close communities, and it's this young, like a black woman who pretends to be a man in order to survive, but she's the leader of this group. She's too young, and she's leading elder people. You know, I think it's worth the read. And haven't reached the end, so I'll tell you if I still have hope in humanity after that.
right on.
All right, let's wrap up then. Let's see. All right, so thank you both, and hopefully we'll be back with Eduardo next week. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog, what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes of this podcast channel there and connect with us. Actually, it reminds me that I might have not done that in the beginning. I remind folks, if you fancy anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 9 platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Telegram, and Rumble. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you'd like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. Well, anyway, Jessica, Kenny, appreciate you both. Thank you so much for doing this today. And we'll all be back here next week.